Welcome to the session on Greek school of thought, the Eleatics. Greek school of philosophy, Eleatics, flourished in the 6th and 5th century BC, is opposed to the materialist philosophy of the Ionian school of thought and the theory of universal flux propounded by the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. According to the Eleatics, the universe is an essentially changeless unity that, being infinite in time and space, is beyond the cognition of the human sense. Only through philosophical reflection, they asserted, can ultimate truth be known. Sensory observations yield merely a limited and distorted view of reality. The name Eleatic is derived from the Greek city of Elea in southern Italy, the home of Parmenides and Zeno, the leading exponents of the school. Scholars differ as to whether the school was founded by Xenophanes or Parmenides. Many of the Eleatic doctrines were based upon the teachings of Xenophanes, while Parmenides developed the Eleatic doctrines into a system of metaphysics. Eleatic philosophy served as a basis for the metaphysical system of Plato. The work of Eleatics marked a definite stage in the evolution of Greek philosophy. Xenophanes originated the dispute between philosophy and religion. He attacked as absurd legendary polytheism and anthropomorphic gods of ancient Greece. Xenophanes argued that the divine can be only one, and it is also the best one. This one ultimate divinity was identified with the world, and so Xenophanes' view termed as pantheistic. Parmenides built his metaphysics upon the principle of ultimate divinity conceived by Xenophanes. His poetic presentation is divided into two parts: the way of truth and the way of opinion. Parmenides observed the empirical world is transitory, as it exists in one moment and goes out of existence in another. But this cannot be the truth of reality, because we cannot know something that changes constantly. So, Parmenides tried to conceive the eternal within the flux of empirical reality. In the conflict between being and not being, the absolute real is the being. According to Parmenides, being is the ultimate reality that transcends all change, and non-being is unreal and illusory. We identified not being with becoming, which belong to the illusory world of senses. So, for Parmenides, being is the ultimate reality, as Thales conceived water and Pythagoras number. Being is the only reality that is eternal, immutable and imperishable. Being is the timeless and indivisible essence of all reality. It is moved and undisturbed, since movement implies becoming. Being exists in and by itself, and so it is independent. Parmenides explained being mainly in negative terms, and so it is without any positive qualities. He distinguished between sense and reason. To the former belong all transitory forms of becoming, into the latter the essential being. Truth lies in reason, and world of sense are illusory. This idea later forms the fundamental proposition of idealism. Some critics do not accept this, and they explain that Parmenides' concept of being is in fact materialistic. Anyway, his idea of being is not a particular thing, but a general abstraction of pure existence. So, W.T. Stace suggests that Parmenides is to be considered as the true sources of later idealistic philosophy. Zeno accepted Parmenides' belief that the universe or being is a single undifferentiated substance, oneness, although it may appear diversified to the senses. Zeno's intention was to discredit the senses which he sought to do through a brilliant series of arguments or paradoxes on time and space that have remained complex intellectual puzzles to this day. Xenophanes. Xenophanes is the pioneer of the quarrel between philosophy and religion. He was a speculative theologian. He advanced the thesis of the permanence of God. He recognized God as one and only one. So, he criticized the polytheistic idea of God. Xenophanes attacks the conception of God as possessing human form. So, he rejected the concept of anthropomorphism and stressed the unchangeable position of God. According to Xenophanes, God is eternal and there is no beginning or end. God is beyond in the sense that there is nothing beside him. He is a perfect form and not a formless infinite. Xenophanes identified God with the world. The world is God, a sentient being, but without organs of sense. So, Xenophanes developed pantheism than monotheism. According to him, God is unchangeable, immutable, undivided, unmoved, passionless and undisturbed. Zeno. Zeno is a controversial thinker of Eleatic school. Zeno's contribution to metaphysics is entirely negative. Zeno agrees with Parmenides on the doctrine of being and does not accept the conception of world of Parmenides. Zeno was concerned with multiplicity and change as the essential qualities of the world. Zeno is the inventor of dialectics. He criticized the view of Parmenides through dialogues. He argued that if we assumed plurality and motion of the world, it involves contradiction. His refutation of plurality is concerned the whole of reality. Zeno developed some interesting paradoxes to support Parmenides' doctrine of being. He used antinomies in which a certain argument is proved false by showing the contradictory proposition that can be derived from it. Thus, Zeno tried to show the ideas of multiplicity and motion as implying contradiction. His famous example of the flying arrow shows that when an arrow is shot, any moment of its flight, it must be in one place, because one thing cannot be at two places in the same moment. This contradicts the view of time as infinitely divisible. Zeno's paradoxes of multitude and motion are significant in our analysis of space and time. If a point or a moment is divisible into infinite units, thus it is absurd to conceive any ultimately indivisible units. This gives rise to the antinomy of our sense experiences, which can be resolved only by dialectical reasoning. So, Zeno had proved the way to dialectical thinking of physical and social reality in Kant, Hegel and Marx. Zeno's argument against multiplicity. World is made up of many parts and this whole can be proved to be both infinitely small and infinitely great. Infinitely small is composed of units. It has many parts or units. These units must be indivisible and have no magnitude. If they are further divisible, there are no units and they can have magnitude and it is divisible. Therefore, many is infinitely small. Hence, many is divisible ad infinitum and is composed of infinite number of parts. But the smallest magnitude multiplied by infinity becomes an infinite magnitude. Therefore, many are infinitely large. Paradox of motion. Zeno contributes 4 famous proofs of the impossibility of motion. It is referred as paradoxes of motion. if first demonstrates in order to pass through the certain space, it must first have moved through half of that space. In order to pass through this half, it must first have gone through half of this half. It clearly defines the impossibility of moving from a position to a goal because of the necessity of passing through the infinite number of points between the starting point and the goal. The second is the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. It demonstrates the impossibility of passing a moving goal. Achilles and tortoise run a race. If the tortoise is given a start in the race, Achilles cannot catch it up. He can get first place. He must run to the point from which the tortoise started in the race. When he gets there, the tortoise will have gone to a point in a greater distance. Achilles must then run to the point and finds then that the tortoise has reached a third point. This will continue infinitely. The distance between them is continuously lessened but never ends. So, Achilles can never catch the tortoise. The third paradox is that of the moving arrow. It represents the story of the flying arrow. It means that an object cannot be in two places at the same time. Therefore, at any particular moment, the arrow is in one place and not in two. Therefore, in every moment of its flight, it is at rest. It is thus at rest throughout. It represents that motion is impossible. Zeno also advances a fourth argument which appeals to the relativity of observed motion. It is concerned with the variable and conflicting testimony of the senses, depending upon whether a moving object is observed from a position at rest or in motion at various speeds. Undermines the very possibility of motion as such. The paradoxes of Zeno becomes famous intellectual puzzles that philosophers and logicians of all subsequent ages have tried to solve. The concern of the Eleatics with the problem of logical consistency laid the basis for the development of the science of logic. Parmenides. Parmenides was the prominent metaphysician of the Eleatic school. He was born in 514 BC. Parmenides challenged Heraclitus' conception of everything as change or becoming. He says that fire becomes water and water becomes earth and earth becomes fire, that things are first are and then are not. Parmenides seeks among the eternal change an everlasting substance that is beyond all change. He focused on the conflict between being and not being. Parmenides accepted the concept of being as the only truth of reality. So, according to Parmenides, the absolutely real is being. Parmenides argued that from being only being can come, that nothing can become something else, that whatever is always has been and always will be, that everything remains what it is. So, he explained that being is the only one eternal, unchangeable, and there cannot be anything in it but being. So, it is continuous and indivisible. Parmenides asserted that not being is unreal and it is not at all. Not being is identified as becoming or a world of shifting and changing things, which is known by our senses. Parmenides says that world of senses is unreal, illusory and mere appearance. So, he called it not being. Parmenides declared that only being is ultimately true. So, the first principle of thing is being. He regarded being and thought as one. So, non-being cannot be thought. That means thought and being are identical. Whatever is thought has being. So, Parmenides makes a distinction between being and becoming that assumed fundamental importance in later philosophy as sense and reason. Being or reality is a homogeneous, continuous, indeterminate mass which is endowed with reason and other side senses. All challenge is inconceivable, therefore world of sense is illusion. What we perceive by senses is to confuse being with non-being. Parmenides offers the doctrine of illusion based on sense perception, according to which there are both being and non-being, and hence motion and change. The world is a result of the mingling of two principles, the warm and light elements and the cold and the dark elements. Being is wholly unmixed with not being, is wholly excludent of all becoming. He described the character of being in a series of negatives. There is no change. It is absolutely unbecoming and imperishable. Such a being has neither beginning nor end, neither arising nor passing away. It must have arising either from being or from not being. But for being arise out of not being is impossible. Parmenides asserted the fundamental thought, ex nihilo nihil fit, being cannot come out of not being or something out of nothing. Parmenides conceived the world as unity and unchangeable and immovable. Sense perception reveals the world of plurality and change, is the world of appearance and opinion. Parmenides said that being is the ultimate reality which occupies space infinitely. It is globe shaped. It occupies space and is material. Parmenides emphasized the disagreement between himself and Milesians as to whether being is finite or infinite. Parmenides asserted that being is globe shaped, therefore it is finite. It was an essential part of the doctrine of Parmenides that empty space is non-existent. According to Parmenides, empty space is simply not being. Parmenides was concerned with being not as a material fact, but as an essentially abstract thought or concept. So, being is not here, not there. It is not in any place or time. It cannot be grasped in our senses because it is found only in reason. The idea of being is the process of abstraction. Parmenides said that being is not divisible and movable. It is a pure concept. It is compared with the idea of whiteness. We cannot see whiteness, only we can see white thing. Being is such a thing. It is a general idea or concept. E.W.F. Tomlin says, being must be eternal, infinite and unchanging. Zeno and his pupil Gorgias continued this argument to prove that substance and not change is the ultimate reality. Now let us conclude. Eleatic school, a Greek school of philosophy which came into existence toward the end of the 6th century BC and ended with Melissus of Samos. It took its name from Elea, a Greek city of Lower Italy, the home of its chief exponents Parmenides and Zeno. Its foundation is often attributed to Xenophanes of Colophon, but although there is much in his speculations which formed part of the later Eleatic doctrine, it is probably more correct to regard Parmenides as the founder of the school. At all events, it was Parmenides who gave it its fullest development. The main doctrines of the Eleatics were evolved in opposition, on the one hand, to the physical theories of the early physical philosophers who explained all existence in terms of primary matter, and on the other hand, to the theory of the Heraclitus that all existence may be summed up as perpetual change. As against these theories, the Eleatics maintained that the true explanation of things lies in the conception of a universal unity of being. The senses, with their changing and inconsistent reports, cannot cognize this unity. It is by thought alone that we can pass beyond the false appearances of sense and arrive at the knowledge of being, at the fundamental truth that the all is one. There can be no creation, for being cannot come from not being. A thing cannot arise from that which is different from it. The errors of common opinion arise to a great extent from the ambiguous use of the verb to be, which may imply existence or be merely the copula which connects subject and predicate. In these main contentions, the Eleatic school achieved a real advance and paved the way to the modern conception of metaphysics. Xenophanes, in the middle of the 6th century, had made the first great attack on the crude mythology of early Greece, including his onslaught on the whole anthropomorphic system enshrined in the poems of Homer and Hesiod. In the hands of Parmenides, this spirit of free thought developed on metaphysical lines. Subsequently, whether from the fact that such bold speculations were obnoxious to the general sense of propriety in Elia, or from the inferiority of its leaders, the school degenerated into verbal disputes as to the possibility of motion and similar academic trifling. The Eleatics rejected the epistemological validity of sense experience and instead took logical standards of clarity and necessity to be the criteria of truth. Of the members, Parmenides and Melissus built arguments starting from indubitably sound premises. Zeno, on the other hand, primarily employed the reductio ad absurdum, attempting to destroy the arguments of others by showing their premises led to contradictions, that is, Zeno's paradoxes. The main doctrines of the Eleatics were evolved in opposition to the theories of the early physicalist philosophers who explained all existence in terms of primary matter, and to the theory of Heraclitus, which declared that all existence may be summed up as perpetual change. The Eleatics maintained that the true explanation of things lies in the conception of a universal unity of being. According to their doctrine, the senses cannot cognize this unity because their reports are inconsistent. It is by thought alone that we can pass beyond the false appearances of sense and arrive at the knowledge of being, at the fundamental truth that the all is one. Furthermore, there can be no creation, for being cannot come from non-being, because a thing cannot arise from that which is different from it. They argued that errors on this point commonly arise from the ambiguous use of the verb to be, which may imply existence or be merely the copula which connects subject and predicate. Though the conclusions of the Eleatics were rejected by the later pre-Socratics and Aristotle, their arguments were taken seriously and they are generally credited with improving the standards of discourse and argument in their time. Their influence was likewise long-lasting. Furthermore, much of the later philosophy of the ancient period borrowed from the methods and principles of the Eleatics. Questions. First one, elucidate concept of Zeno's paradoxes of motion. Second, evaluate Parmenides' concept of substance. Third, give a brief summary on Eleatic thought. Books for your reference. 1. Tilly Frank, History of Philosophy, Central Publishing House, Allahabad, revised edition by Ledger Wood, Professor of Philosophy, Princeton University. 2. Massey Y, A Critical History of Western Philosophy, Motilal Banarsi Das, publication 01 January 1999. Third, Sinha Jadunath, A Manual of Ethics, New Central Book Agency, New Print 1994. Fourth, Journals and Articles from Internet. Fifth, Stewart David, Blocker Jean H, Fundamentals of Philosophy, Dorling Kindersley Private Limited, 2008. Here we conclude the session. We will meet again with another topic. Till then, bye.